This is your city. This is your city wants to know. We want to know the background, the heartbeat of what makes up our beautiful cities. We dig into the backstories, from the struggles to the successes of our local entrepreneurs, small business owners, artists, not-for-profit organizations, and the many, many people who make up the intricate tapestry of our communities. Real people, real stories, by you and for you. But wait, that's not it. I love giving my opinion. Just ask anyone who knows me. We can't get enough of the honest, gritty feedback of places that we spend our hard-earned money. I'll give you the good, the bad, and the ugly of the places I eat, sleep, and visit. Disclaimer, my opinion only. All right, so come on, let's get to it. Good evening, everyone, and welcome to This Is Your City. As always, this is Kim, your host. Today we are doing part 2 of teen addictions. If you recall, last week we did part 1 with Richard Capriola, and I'm just going to do a recap of who Richard is and what he does, so those of you who may have missed last week can get a little bit caught up. But hi, Richard, welcome back. Thank you for coming back.
Hi, Kim. Thank you so much for inviting me back. I'm looking forward to it.
Awesome. So let me just recap and tell the people who you are. So Richard has been a mental health and substance abuse counselor for a couple of decades. He recently retired from Menninger Clinic, which is in Houston, where he worked as an addictions counselor for adults and adolescents for over a decade. And he's the author of a book called The Addicted Child, A Parent's Guide to Adolescent Substance Abuse. Again, that's The Addicted Child, The Parent's Guide to Adolescent Substance Abuse. Now, last time, Richard, we talked about differences between adult and adolescent addictions. We talked about warning signs parents should know, how parents can protect their child from getting involved with substances. We talked about that. Today, though, I'd like to do it a little bit different if you're okay with that. I want to do sort of like a question-answer period, but I also want to get in and talk about you, Richard. I want to talk about what you did at the hospital at the Menninger. I got that right?
Yes, you did.
Said that last time too. Clinics. I just want to get into that and see, as a mental health counselor at the psychiatric hospital, are we good to go with that? Are you okay with that today?
Yeah, sure. We can begin with that.
Awesome. So I'm going to get you to talk about that in a sec. I just want to let people know what that is, what the Menninger Psychiatric Clinic was. So you guys were all experts, of course. You were dealing in many different disorders, including anxiety, depression, addictions, trauma. You did women's mental health, you did personality disorders, sleep issues, suicide, bipolar. You did many, many things there. But you yourself, were you in with the teens and adolescents addictions solely, or did you deal with a lot of those other things as well?
Well, I was hired to be an addictions counselor for Menninger Clinic. And Menninger Clinic, as you noted, is a rather large psychiatric hospital. It's rated as one of the top 10 psychiatric hospitals in the United States.
Wow.
They serve both adolescents and adults from around the world, really. And there are a number of treatment units that are on Menninger. There's a treatment unit for adolescents. There's one for young adults. There's one for professionals. There's one for general adults. And then there is also a psychiatric assessment and stabilization unit. Now, when I was at Menninger, I worked on the adolescent program where I saw a lot of adolescents and their families. And I also worked on the psychiatric assessment and stabilization unit. Both of these units specialize in doing diagnoses, doing assessments, preparing treatment plans, and then providing short-term treatment. Most of the patients would move on to longer-term treatment, but I was a part of an assessment team. So our job was to do the assessment, figure out what the diagnoses were, and then come forth with a treatment plan, and then provide some services and some treatment over about a 3 or 4 week period of time. I was part of a comprehensive team. The team consisted of a psychiatrist, a social worker, a psychologist, and addictions counselor. So we all worked together to put together this treatment and do the diagnoses as well as all the assessments.
Wow, that's incredible. That's a lot of work because you get a battery of diagnostics to go through to find out, to assess a teen or an adolescent. One of the questions I had from somebody was, we went through what the difference for addictions in adults and adolescents were, what some of the different diagnostic training or the psychological evaluations that you would go through with an adolescent as opposed to an adult, because there's not as much, you know, adults have more understanding. And so what's some of the different testing, diagnostic, psychological testings you would go through for an adolescent?
Well, there are some specific assessment tests that are geared towards adolescents and another specific test that's geared for adults. So we use an assessment that the patient fills out, asks a number of questions, and it's pretty comprehensive. There's an adult version that's geared towards assessing adults, and there's an adolescent version that's geared towards assessing adolescents. And those are the two primary assessments that we use to determine the type of diagnosis. Is there a substance use disorder, and is it mild, moderate, or severe? So adolescents have their own assessment form, adults have a different assessment form. Aside from that, regardless of whether it's an adult or an adolescent, what I would do is sit down with them and they would complete the assessment, the written assessment. But then I would spend quite a bit of time with just talking to them to get a history and a better understanding of the substances they used. What substances were they using? How old were they when they began? How often were they using? And we'd talk about the consequences of their use. And that was true for both adolescents and adults. So really the diagnosis was a result of the testing that was done, and then me talking to them and getting their view and getting a comprehensive history.
What's an age range for an adolescent?
The adolescents generally run from preteens all the way through age 17. Once they turned 18, they were no longer legally able to be on an adolescent unit. They were transferred to an adult unit. So if a patient came in and they were 18 or older, they would go to an adult unit. If they were under age 18, they would go to an adolescent unit.
What's the youngest adolescent you treated?
Probably around 10 to 11 years old. It was unusual that they would be that young. Most of them were in the category of 14, 15, 16, and 17.
Wow.
But I did see some that were younger.
That's crazy. So once they're there, maybe my misunderstanding of possibly how this works. So they would stay there. What was the length of a stay that an adolescent would stay with you?
Generally 3 to 4 weeks, and during that time they would go through a number of medical examinations. They would have psychological testing done. They might have some neuropsychological testing done. They may have an MRI done of their brain. Then they would be going, their day would be spent either meeting with professionals like myself or attending group sessions that were held throughout the day. So they had a lot of group activity as well as individual. And then we had a large nursing staff that would be meeting with them and monitoring them and handing out medications and would be there pretty much 24/7.
Medications for what?
Whatever medications they came in on that were prescribed, and then any that the psychiatrist prescribed while they were with us. Those medications were all monitored by our nursing staff. The patients, the kids would have to go to a nursing window. They would have to show their ID badge, and then it's all electronically, watched out for. But any medications that they were supposed to get during the day was monitored and handled by our nursing staff.
Wow. So I'm just picturing a young 10, 11, 12-year-old for 3 weeks away from home. I mean, it's hard enough for an adult to be in a facility for that long, but for an adolescent, that just might seem like a lifetime.
It is, and quite honestly, most of them did not want to come in for the assessment or for treatment. They were opposed to it. But the families had gotten to the situation where it was almost desperate. They needed to get something done. The situation had gotten that serious. And most of the time, it wasn't just the drugs that they were concerned with. It was the underlying mental health issue that was also causing problems. So parents brought them to us on our assessment and treatment unit to, number one, get an accurate diagnosis. What's really going on here? And then to provide some short-term treatment. And then third, to get a recommendation, because many of these kids needed to go on to a longer-term residential program, and we would give the parents resources and recommendations on which one of those programs matched up good with their child's diagnoses.
Well, that brings me to a question that somebody had sent me to ask you, and I was going to get to some of those questions later, but it fits right into here. So I just want to give me 1 second so I can go find that question, because I think it kind of goes with this one. Okay, so he said self-medicating can be undiagnosed for another underlying effect such as bipolar. What do you say to that?
I say that that's very common. First of all, that an adolescent will be using a substance to medicate an underlying issue. An example that I would give you, Kim, is that most of the kids that I worked with who were smoking marijuana, when I asked them to help me understand why they were smoking the drug, the number one answer that came back was, it helps me with my anxiety. So for a lot of kids, not all kids, but for a lot of kids, there's an underlying emotional issue to which they're using a drug like marijuana to medicate, for example, anxiety. It could be depression, it might be some type of trauma, it might be because they've been bullied, could be a number of other reasons. And that's why I stress to parents, it's so important to get a comprehensive assessment. Don't just focus on the drugs. You need to know whether there is or there is not an underlying issue that might be driving your child to use a substance.
Wow. That's insane. And it's incredible to think that that age we have so many underlying effects with our young ones, that I think we're getting better. Science is getting better. Everything is getting better at recognizing things and not making excuses for it. Like we talked last time, like, oh, they're just a teenager. Oh, they're just going through stuff. Oh, they're going to grow out of it. We're getting better at that. But I just want to ask you again, so they're there for 3 weeks, possibly less, possibly more.
Yeah.
What's expected of them while they're there? Like, they obviously are going to have a regime. Like, what's expected of an adolescent at the facilities?
Well, the expectation is that they cooperate with the treatment and assessment program. So what does that mean? That means that they're expected to meet with professionals like myself, with the social workers, with the psychologists that are doing psychological testing, and they're expected to meet with their psychiatrist during the week too. And all of these meetings last an hour or more. So they're expected to attend individual meetings with the professionals. In addition to that, they're expected to go to the groups during the day. And there are groups that start like at 8 o'clock in the morning and run all the way till 7 or 8 o'clock at night. So they are expected to go to these groups. Some of these groups are individual, like I had a couple of addictions groups. People who have an addictions diagnosis are expected to come to my groups. But then there are a whole slew of groups that everybody is expected to go to. Some of them are therapy oriented. They might be like dialectical behavior therapy or rational emotive therapy. They're basically different types of therapy groups. Some of them are, enjoyable groups, like maybe an art group, maybe a music group. They go to the gym where they can exercise and work out. When the weather's warm, we have a pool that they can go to. So we keep them pretty busy during the day.
Wow. So it's kind of like an intervention sometimes, isn't it? Where the parents, I'm sure like you said, some of them just don't want to go, but they're a minor. And if their parents bring them and say, this is too severe, it's like an intervention, and you guys take over.
That's pretty much a good description of what it is, an intervention in a lot of cases, because the adolescent, being an adolescent, doesn't want to go away from home, doesn't want to go into a facility where they're away from their family and their friends and their routines. But the situation is such that the parents are not giving them an option. It has gotten to the point where the parents almost feel desperate that they need some answers.
And they need help. They just cannot do it on their own.
They do, and our social workers were very good at conducting family sessions throughout the stay, so that a lot of these were done by telephone, but our social workers would meet with the family at least once a week to, number one, tell them what's been going on and what's happened in the past week with their child, but
Mhm.
also to do some family therapy and family support as well.
Well, so that brings me to another question. I read somewhere that throughout this whole diagnostic process, you invite the patients, the adolescents, the teens, whomever it is, in on it to ask questions about their diagnosis, to ask questions about their treatment and how they're going, which I find amazing and wonderful because it helps them feel like they're a part of this process and they have a voice.
Yeah, they're an integral part of the process from the beginning all the way through the discharge planning and the discharge of the student. They're told what the results of the testing are. They're told what the diagnosis is, and they're told what the recommendation is going to be. And sometimes they don't like the recommendation. So if you have a child and the recommendation is, we think you need to go to a residential treatment program, they often get upset and rebel against that. And then at the end of the process, we have a separate meeting with the family that does not include the kid usually. And this is where the family gets the benefit of all the information that we have learned. They learn the final diagnosis, they learn the recommendations, which they already knew in advance, but they have an opportunity to sit down with the team and listen to the information and ask questions.
So the parents are involved, of course, throughout the whole way as well.
Yeah.
Then the patients are encouraged to ask questions and learn about their progress and process, but the parents are also encouraged to be involved. Now, do you get a lot of parents not really wanting to be involved? They just drop them off and say, "Take care of my kids."
No, not really. Not really. Most of the parents are involved. They're curious. They want to know what's going on. They want to know week to week what's been going on with their child. They want to know at the end of the process what the diagnoses are and what the recommendations are. They may or may not agree with the recommendation. And they're given a weekly status report. And anytime they have a question, their primary contact is the social worker. So they have the phone number and the email of the social worker. So if they have a question during the week, they can simply contact the social worker and the social worker will follow up with them.
Right. So how many, this is because I know somebody personally who has been in a psychiatric hospital for treatments 3 times. So what's the rules, if I can use that word? What happens for that if a patient is released, and then are they able to come back for additional treatment?
They're certainly able to come back for additional treatment, not necessarily assessment, but if they don't go to one of our treatment programs, like I say, we have a treatment plan program for adolescents as well as a treatment program for young adults, which are like 18 to 29. In many cases, though, the underlying issue is so severe that the child will be referred to another longer-term treatment program. That's generally the case when the underlying emotional issue is really very severe, that they need treatment in a specialized facility that treats not only the addiction or the drug use, but specializes in treating the underlying issue, whatever it is.
Wow, thank you so much. I do want to get to some of these questions though,
Okay.
just so we can get them in, and when they listen, they can say, okay, thank you for answering my question. So let me just get them here.
Okay.
One lady, she asks, if you could change one thing about how we clinically approach teen addiction, what would it be?
Wow. I think I would begin by changing what we do in the school system, and I would start at a very young age. This don't just say no approach has never worked. in all the years that we have been trying it.
Mhm.
But I would begin in the early elementary years, and I would focus on the neuroscience. I would focus on helping children from very early on, all the way through high school, understand the neuroscience. And by that, I mean understand the fact that their brain is developing, the need to protect their brain, and what these drugs do to their brain. And I would reinforce that every single year, all the way through high school. This would not be a one and done type of assembly where you talk about this. This needs to be begun at the early elementary school years and then reinforced every single year so that kids are getting the idea that their brain is a process in developing. These substances can do real harm to their brain, and this is how you can protect your brain. And I think that if we were to do that, we might have some more success in steering kids away from substance use rather than what we're doing in schools now.
I think that is a great idea. I don't remember, maybe they did. I don't remember too much focusing on the emphasis of how our brains are developed, and even in health and science and stuff, you skip over things, but I think that is a brilliant idea. I would,
It's
I think that's a
it's
brilliant idea.
it's the one thing that in my working with teenagers that I found that actually caught their attention. It didn't do me any good to tell kids, it's illegal to use
Right.
drugs.
But
Your grades might drop. You might not get through high school. You might not get to college. You might not get a job. They didn't care because they didn't believe it. But what did capture their attention was when I talked to them about the brain and the neuroscience and how these drugs impacted the brain. And that's why I'm saying focus on a neuroscience approach. You're more likely to capture these kids' attention.
yeah, and just because they're younger doesn't mean that that doesn't strike an interest in them. It's not over their head. You don't have to use huge medical terms.
No,
It's not over their head. They can understand that.
you can, and you make it age appropriate, which means when they're very young, you start with the elementary, just the basics, and as they grow older, then you can start to add in a little bit more of the scientific information in very simple language. This does not have to be complicated, but it's more likely to capture their attention.
Yes. Another question. Well, I want to say that question was from Joanne Conger. I hope I get that right. Another question from Isaac Gresser. It's actually more of a statement, but I wanted to mention this statement anyway. He said, "I'm glad I got all of my major drug addictions out of the way before I turned 21 and I could really mess up my life." He used another word, but we'll say mess up. I'm really glad I got all my major drug addictions out of the way before I turned 21, before I could really mess up my life. And the reason I want to mention that statement instead of a question is because at a younger age, I had some pretty major drug addictions as well. And, thank God I'm out of that. And the reason I wanted to mention this statement, Richard, is because it's not thankful that I got it out of my system at a young age. That's where we talked about the last episode, like, oh, they're just young, they're just doing what young people do. Not everybody's as fortunate to get it out of their system, if we can say that, by the time they're 21. What do you say to that statement?
I say that pretty much just about all addiction starts in the adolescent years. So if a person is going to become addicted to a substance, they are very likely to begin that process as an adolescent. And then it may move into adulthood. It may expand and get more serious, and it may have some devastating consequences. Parents need to be aware that almost all addiction starts in these adolescent years.
And okay, so fine, you might start at a young age and start becoming addicted and move out of that because life happens, you get jobs, but you might not be an addict anymore, but there could be physical and mental lifelong physical and mental complications and that come with that.
There
So
very well could be, because these drugs change the developing adolescent brain. Many of the kids that I worked with who were smoking marijuana, when the psychological and neuropsychological tests came back, the processing speed of their brain was below average, their short-term memory was impaired, and their motivation was very poor. So these drugs can affect the brain in ways that can have some long-term consequences.
yes, definitely. Next question we have, Colton Tequila, excuse me if I'm getting these names wrong. How have you seen this issue change in your over 20 years of experience?
Well, that's a great question. I think the good news is that if we look over the last 10 and 20 years, some of these harder core drugs have actually declined significantly in the adolescent population. Drugs like LSD and
Mhm.
some of the more illicit drugs have declined. Alcohol and marijuana, however, continue to be the primary substances that adolescents have been using, and that's been true for a long, long period of time, alcohol and marijuana. But what we have noticed that's changed in the last 3 years is a tremendous increase in what's called vaping,
Mhm.
vaping of marijuana and vaping of nicotine. There has been a dramatic increase in the percentage of kids that are using vaping as a way to get their nicotine or to get their marijuana. Cigarette smoking is at an all-time low, but kids have switched from smoking to vaping nicotine. And just one example of how this has really increased is that 3 years ago, just 3 years ago, the number of seniors that were vaping a substance like marijuana was 9%. Today it's 22%. So it's vaping is becoming a major issue that parents need to be aware of.
Now, when you say seniors, you're talking about seniors in high school, not seniors, or are you talking about seniors in age?
I think you mentioned that last time I made that mistake. Thank you. I'm talking about seniors in high school. I need to keep clarifying that. It's not
But
people my age. These are
I
these are seniors in high school.
definitely, and because they think it's cool, they think it's not as dangerous, and in my opinion, it's become much more accessible and much more acceptable.
Well, that's a good point. And it applies to all drugs because what we are noticing is that these kids know that drugs are available. 80% of them will tell us it's very easy for them to find marijuana. 30% will tell us it's easy to find LSD if they want to find it. And over 80% say finding alcohol is not a big problem. And associated with that, the ease of getting these drugs and substances is the fact that kids don't think they're very harmful. So when you combine easy availability and a low risk of harm, you've created a perfect environment for, adolescent substance abuse.
And I don't think much has changed over the last few decades in that sense, because when I was younger, it was not hard to find anything anytime we wanted. I mean, and things are more now, but I mean, imagine back then, it wasn't hard at all. Like we could find anybody to buy us alcohol underage. It was
Yeah.
never a problem.
And
Or
yeah,
marijuana or
and you're right. That has not changed in the last 20 years. Marijuana and alcohol are still the two primary substances that attract kids, and they're both easily available to them.
yes. So another question here is, as a counselor working in a psychiatric hospital, what is your most proud moment and what is your most disappointed moment? Wow, that's a good question.
Um, well, there were many proud moments because I got to see these kids come in the door feeling depressed or anxious, feeling oppositional, and then got to see them transition through the 3 or 4 weeks that they were there till by the time they left, they were feeling better, they were doing better, they were even open to looking at further treatment. And sometimes, I would hear back from them years later. Some of them have gone on to college and they contacted me and talked about how great they were doing. So there were a lot of rewarding moments when they would contact me years down the road and tell me, how grateful they were that they came into the clinic, into the hospital. They were grateful for the work that the staff did, and they just wanted us to know, how well they were doing.
Wow.
Um, yeah. In terms of disappointments, I think there were some cases where the parents either were not able to afford the longer term treatment or just didn't want to send their kid away. And, that there was nothing more than we could do other than give them the recommendation. Um, in those cases were heartbreaking because I knew that the kid was probably going to, relapse, and it might very well turn into a worse situation. But treatment is not cheap. It's very expensive, and I can understand how parents sometimes can say, "We just can't afford this."
You just can't do it. Oh, wow. Wow. So another one here is, what is something you see the most and how would you prevent it?
Well, because I'm an addictions counselor, the thing I saw most was kids using substances, and a lot of them were using marijuana. Some were using alcohol. And again, I think in terms of prevention, what I would say to a parent is, start to develop that uh, that sense of trust, those good communication skills that you can develop, so that at a very early age, um, even the preteen age, you can start to build that foundation of trust.
Mhm.
I would say, regardless of the age of your child, learn good communication skills that every parent can learn. And by that, I mean, we're pretty good, Kim, at listening to other people's words when we talk to them, but we're not so good at listening to the feelings behind those words. And
Mm,
that's a skill that every parent can practice and every parent can learn, so that when our child is talking to us, we're not just hearing their words, we're hearing their feelings. And when you can develop that kind of communication with your child, it will pay dividends not only in their adolescent years, but in their adult years as well. And that's probably one of the best things I think parents can do to lay the foundation that may keep their child away from getting involved with drugs.
perfect, because you just answered the next question, really, so that we won't have to get into it. But the next question was, how do you support teens struggling with addictions or before? So basically, you just answered that. Hear their feelings, hear their emotions, not just the words,
Yeah.
and support them through it. Open the lines of communication. So you answered that one. So thank you for that. Our next question is from Tony Estabrooks, and she says, do you think your parents are being nosy? Do many, do you think your parents are being nosy or doing it because they care? Most teens would think that you're just being nosy, just leave me alone.
Exactly right. Most kids are going to look at infringing their privacy as interfering with their life, and they're going to, negatively react to that. But you're the parent. You have to do what you think is right. If you're concerned about your child using a substance, you have every right to investigate it. You have every right to question your child about it, and not in an interrogation type of format, but out of love and concern. Um, and so you have every right as a parent to find out what's going on. If your child's not cooperative and you're still concerned, then you need to move to the next stage and get the assessments and the professional's opinion of what's going on. But no, you're not infringing upon your child when you suspect they may be using a dangerous substance.
Definitely. And that again answers some of these questions roll into other questions like Crystal Schmidt. She said, how do you get your child to understand you're here to help and not judge? And that's sort of the same thing. Like, just, you have a right to ask, you have a right to question lovingly, not convictingly.
Yes, and I think the answer to that question is that when you approach the child and you're talking to them about their substance use, you're doing it out of a concern. You're not doing it in an accusing way or in a threatening way. You're approaching it from the standpoint of, help me understand why you're doing this. I'm curious. I'd like to know more. Please help me understand why you're using marijuana or you're drinking alcohol. Help me understand why you're doing that. So you're not accusing them and you're not condemning them. You're taking the standpoint of, I'm curious. I want to know more about that.
I love that. And just as you're saying that, another thought came into my head too. What if we don't say, tell me why you're doing this because I want to be able to help you? That might not be the right thing to say, because a lot of them don't think they need help, and a lot of them think I'm here to help you is more control. So just asking the questions, being curious, and making it about them and not you saying, I want to help. What do you think of that? Like, take the I want to help out, or should you leave it in but just ask it differently?
I would stay with the I'm curious. Please help me understand that. I'd like to know more. I love you. I'm concerned, but please help me understand what's going on. I'm sure that there's a reason behind why you're doing this, and I'm just curious about what it would be, and I'd like for you to share that. And from that, you will find out whether or not the child is going to respond and give you information, or if they're going to shut down and become angry and back away. But regardless of the approach that you get from the child, if you're concerned, the next step is to get the assessments done that I've outlined in my book.
That is amazing. Yeah. You just answered so many questions in that. And I think it's a different way of seeing it, of hearing it, what you just said. I think that's going to help a lot of people approach things differently and be able to open more lines of communications just by doing it how you just said that. So thank you so much for that part. And the rest of the questions that come, I got a lot of the same kind of questions, some of them asked a little bit differently, but the same questions is, how do we know the signs? I didn't even know my child was doing drugs in high school until he told me later on in life that he was a pothead. How do we be more vigilant, and how do we know the signs? So all
That's
encompassing, you've talked about that last episode, but all encompassing, let's just talk about that for a minute.
Well, that's an excellent question, because a number of times I would sit across from parents and I would go through their child's history of using a substance, and I would give them the diagnosis of a substance use disorder that was either mild or moderate or severe. And after hearing that information, they would look across at me and they would say, "I had no idea this was going on." Or if they suspected their child was using a substance, they would say, "Well, I knew something was going on, but I didn't know it was this bad." Now, they're not bad parents, okay? In many cases, they didn't know the warning signs to look out for. No one had ever told them that you should be looking out for these warning signs. So I think it's really important that every parent be aware of these warning signs, know what to look for. And if these warning signs persist over a period of time, as opposed to a day or two, then I think you need to move to get the answers that you deserve as a parent, and get the diagnoses that you deserve, so that you know how serious the situation is, whether there's an underlying mental health issue that could be driving the substance use, and what the best plan for treatment is.
Right. Perfect. And as you just mentioned here a second ago, parents, with your book, we mentioned your book, The Addicted Child, A Parent's Guide to Adolescent Abuse, Substance Abuse. You have a workbook that goes along with this book for parents. And so I do strongly recommend that the parents grab this workbook, and it will answer so many questions, and it will help you through some of these things, and how to deal with this and how to walk through it. So yeah, your book has that workbook. Can you just want to speak on that for a moment?
Yeah, I think, in some respect, when I would meet with parents, it was many times more troubling for them to hear the psychiatric diagnosis than the substance abuse diagnosis. They were surprised by the substance use diagnosis, but they were shocked by the mental health diagnosis. And that's very hard for a parent to hear, that your child is suffering from an extremely high level of anxiety or depression, or might be self-injuring themselves, or is developing an emerging personality disorder. Those are very frightening terms for a parent to hear. Um, and and I think parents felt guilty. They felt like they had not been good parents. They questioned whether or not how did they miss the warning signs. So I developed this very short parent workbook to help parents, to give them some exercises where they could go through, talk about their emotions, talk about their feelings, write a letter to their child about how they felt about everything. There's a short little exercise on how to handle and deal with anxiety. And then there are some examples of, getting back to the communication, how you can talk to your child in a way that helps you listen to their feelings, not just their words. There's a couple of good examples in there. So in addition to the main book, I recommend parents pick up a copy of the workbook. And I think the workbook is best used in consultation with a good friend, another family member, a spouse, or a professional counselor. But I think just a good friend, because it will allow you to do the exercises in the workbook, share them with somebody you trust, and get feedback.
Great advice. That's great advice. Yeah. And that helps you just approach it in a little bit of a different way. Having an unbiased opinion too can help a lot.
And support. The other thing I would say as a parent going through this, get some support. Build yourself a support system. It could be a family member, it could be a friend, but build a support system so that you have some encouragement and support as you go through this journey with your child.
Definitely. Thank you so much. And my own 2 little cents in here, my 2 cents. Never give up on your child. Never
Yeah.
give up on your teenager, your young adult, your adult child. Never give up on them. Sometimes you may have to, what I call, detach with love when they get older, or not as getting them help and stuff is doing that, but don't give up on them, because we never know what their path is going to be. So
Yeah.
be strong. Like Richard just said, get yourself some support, because you yourself need support. Your family needs support. It can destroy families as well. So get some support. Don't give up. Keep the love going. Keep the love going. And
Yeah.
they can find you at Help the Addicted Child.
They can go to the book's website, which is www.helptheaddictedchild.com. The book and the parent workbook are both available through Amazon. They can go directly to Amazon and just put in The Addicted Child, A Parent's Guide to Adolescent Substance Abuse, or they can go to the book's website, helptheaddictedchild.com, and there'll be links that'll take you directly to Amazon. The Kindle version, a lot of people like to read on a Kindle. That is priced at 99 cents, and the paperback, I think, is less than $10. So I've tried to make this extremely affordable because I really want parents to have this information. Having the knowledge is power, and I'm hoping that parents who take the time to read this book, and it's only about 100 pages, so it's not going to take a lot of time. I'm hoping that they'll feel better prepared in the event that they face this situation. They'll feel more confident that they know how to deal with it, and that they'll feel more hopeful, because there is a sense of hope in this book. And I'm so glad you brought this up. There is a sense of hope that treatment works. Your child and your family can get through this, but know the warning signs, because the earlier you can get on top of this, the more likely you are to get it resolved sooner.
Right. And the last advice you had given the last time before is this: don't take it as, they're just being kids, or this is normal. Everybody went through it. I did it, so they're going to go through it. Don't think that, because it can be more dangerous. Your job is to be a parent, not a friend first.
It's a very dangerous attitude to have. Some of it, no doubt, is adolescent acting out, but you'll notice that comes and goes. Or if you have any question, then turn to the professionals and get the assessments done. You'll know one way or the other after that.
Right. Richard, thank you so much. This was so inspiring and eye-opening. I think this is so important. Like you said, there's a lot of dangerous behavior out there that we can have if we don't have the knowledge and the tools, and you've provided some of that for us. So thank you so much, Richard. I wish you all the best. I know you said you were retired, so most people I know who are retired are more busy than they were when they were working. So.
That's true. It works out that way. You're right.
But thank you so much, and we'll keep in touch, and we'll have your information at the end of this so people can get in touch with you, get your book, get the workbook if need be. So thank you so much.
Great. Thank you, Kimberly. And thank you for participating in the discussion. I think it was very helpful. So thank you for taking the time to meet with me. Thank you for participating in the discussion. And hopefully we've answered a lot of questions today.
I think so. Thank you so much. Thank you. Thank you. And for you, my listeners, I just want to say thank you so much for tuning in again. This is an extremely important subject that needs to be talked about again, and again, not just one time. So please get the book, get the workbook, talk to your children, ask the questions, be curious. in a loving manner. This is extremely important. So thank you, and we will see you all again. Don't forget to like, share, subscribe, send a pigeon, tell everybody that they need to be listening to This Is Your City. Stay safe, stay blessed. Ciao.